All right, good morning, True City. Welcome back. Wasn't it so good to hear from Todd last night, navigating, what we're all experiencing in an unprecedented season, learning new things about ourselves, and also the communal sense of challenge, certainly that we feel individually, but also as the church. And so today, I'm here with four of my closest friends, pastors in the good old city of Hamilton, talking about exactly that. And so we want to make this infinitely practical, talking about all of the things that collectively we've experienced as leaders and servers in each of our churches. And so my name is Jimmy. I'm one of the pastors at the Meeting House in downtown Hamilton, and then I'm going to throw it over to my far right.
Yeah. Thanks, Jimmy. So my name is Anthony Ellenboss. I'm a pastor at Emmanuel Christian Reformed Church. We're one of the few True City churches that's up on the mountain. We're on the corner of West 5th and Mohawk.
Very good.
And my name is Bill DeYoung, and I'm the pastor of Blessings Christian Church, and we're located on Locke Street at the intersection of Stanley Avenue, close to Aberdeen.
I'm Amy Knox. I am one of the full-time pastoral staff at St. Clair Community Church. We right now meet at Ryerson United Church. We're down in the St. Clair Gage Park neighborhood.
And I'm Kevin Makins, one of the pastors at Eucharist Church, and we currently meet in a building on, I say currently meet, it's our building, so we meet there all the time. It's just kind of new to us on Victoria Avenue North in downtown Hamilton.
Very good. Okay, so first things first, you'll notice that all of us have wardrobe changes right in the middle of our conversations. We're really trying to hold to, well, not trying, we are holding to our COVID-19 protocols. And so if Kevin reaches out his arm, we're both about 6'5", and we can't reach each other. So we're taking those precautions to stay at a distance. I'm going to be moderating our conversation, so I will keep my mask off, but these friends will be keeping their masks on when they're not speaking, and then removing it, just so you know. So we want to jump in right away, and the first question that I have for us, and maybe Amy will go to you first, is how has leading your community been a challenge in this season?
I should have started taking my mask off earlier. I think among many, probably the biggest one is just not being able to see who's there. Not knowing where people are at, how they're doing. People have this tendency to not reach out when they're doing poorly. And so it's taken a ton of intentionality to just even see who's there. And to know like how the things that you're saying are even landing with people and how they're responding. So a lot of the time it feels like throwing stuff to see what sticks. But I think what I'm learning in that is to trust the work of the Holy Spirit in each person and their lives and their own transformation. It was never up to me. So, just growing in that trust of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, it's such a valid point. I wonder, before you put your mask back on, did you find a difference like in the first lockdown? Like at our church, for example, we found that people were kind of primed to engage. It's like, oh, this is all new. All the entrepreneurs came out, the social entrepreneurs. And now, my experience is exactly what you've said. It's like, actually, I'm just exhausted at being on screen. So have you found that as well?
Yeah, I would say our Zoom fatigue actually hit pretty early. We have a ton of just young families, and screen time is already at a high if you're trying to work at home and your kids are there. So yeah, I would say definitely it's compounded, but even in the first lockdown, we were starting to experience that.
Yeah, for sure. Bill, what about you?
I thought Amy said scream time for
Tomatoes
a bit there, and that's very. Did you? That would be very accurate.
Same thing.
I share Amy's perspective as well. I suppose another thing for me is the polarization that exists in communities regarding the pandemic itself, regarding lockdowns, regarding the role of government. And I think it's exacerbated by the fact that people are often home and they're often on social media and they're being exposed to things they shouldn't be. And you see the polarization of American politics spill over into Canada as well. People have very sharp opinions. And I actually worry about going forward whether, these different camps that have been established during the pandemic will persist beyond the pandemic. So it will represent a pastoral challenge for me going forward as well.
For sure. And how do you feel like you've navigated that, in particular, the polarization of like position and politics in your church context?
Not very well.
It's the best pastoral answer.
I try not to be overly opinionated, and I try, to create space for a lot of different voices. But on some of these matters, I have very strong opinions, and I felt a pastoral calling, in fact, to share those opinions because I believe that they were biblically grounded and truthful and that people needed to hear. But it has caused some alienation in some respects. So it's a very, very difficult thing.
Yeah. I love that. That's a takeaway from even just that your short sharing there is like not trying to be overly opinionated. I think a lot of times the Western Christian church has gotten that quite wrong. In fact, you would expect the church to be opinionated and laying down the law, so to speak. So it's a beautiful model that you're saying, no, I actually just want to care for, be a peaceful person and shepherd my people. That's great. Kevin, what about you?
What was the question again specifically?
I've
just been listening so intensely to my colleagues here.
Yeah, so how have you at Eucharist Church and you as a leader been navigating this time?
Oh my gosh, it depends on the hour you ask me. Like sometimes it used to be depends on the day, and now it depends on the hour, because sometimes it feels like we can do this. This is okay. This is an important learning trial. And sometimes, as you said, it's scream time at 8 o'clock every night where you just go find your pillow and let it all out because it's so disorienting. So I think that there's been some of that fatigue. I feel like the second lockdown, I don't know about anyone else at home, it's a lot less fun. Like the first one's kind of novel. Everybody was watching Contagion on Netflix being like, This is kind of silly. We're in a global pandemic. But now it's cold and it's tiring and it's a very different kind of feel. So I think that on the one hand, it's really, really hard right now, even for people in our community who are really healthy, but who are struggling, but also people then that feel isolated, people that work in healthcare, which is a huge part of our congregation. These are people that have just been like serving and serving and serving and giving and giving. And so we've really had to shift the mentality of our community from, when we get together, we're going to like do something important, or we're going to like try something new. We're going to pivot. All the businesses love to talk about pivoting. We're done pivoting. We're going to be tired. We're going to be mentally exhausted, and we're going to be the one Zoom call, hopefully in town, that you participate in where we don't need something from you. We're here to pray together. We're here to listen to Scripture together. We're here to receive something, and if that thing isn't grace, then we're not going to be able to handle it. We're going to buck against it. So in a lot of ways, what we do now, I don't know about anyone else, feels like it's the most pruned down existence of a church we've ever had. But I do feel like we're so hungry that even if it's just scraps, even if this isn't a very good meal that we're participating in, it's a chance to see some people that we love, that we miss. It's a chance to pray together. And so there's a gift that can come when you're finally tired enough to say, all right, we're dropping all our expectations. We're just going to receive whatever God's got for us today.
For sure. So good. Yeah, grace. Anthony, what about for you and your community?
Yeah, so for us, I think all of the above. And maybe just to highlight, the loss of community has been most significant. And I think out of that loss of community has come our tiredness, has come our diving increasingly. I'm seeing this more and more in our community that there are people engaging with some of these conspiracy theory sorts of things, but more more anger and frustration with the government, with the lockdown, with the ongoing situation. And it's not hard for me to understand why looking at different things is making inroads. So just the loss of community, the flattening of our experience, it's draining the life out of us, because we're created for communion and community. And so that's been a big challenge. And as I've faced that, Bill mentioned, the political polarization in the States. So I'm an American. I know your wife is an American, right? So I've been sucked in. It's like a black hole. It just pulls me right in. And so through January especially, it's been crazy. But it has also forced me back, I think, to start to recognize just some of the bedrock of our faith, like recognizing that when we're tired like this, what people are longing to hear is like, God's still got you. Like, he still journeys with us. He's still saving us. And I've realized that I need to hear that more too these days, as I look out at all the different polarization, the divides, the crazy things that are out there. It raises the question in my mind, my goodness, like, who can save us? And I'm like, oh, right. Ta-da, yeah. And then I realize, this is, as every moment is, a moment to just preach the gospel. Like, yep, God is still in the business of saving us, of journeying with us. And that has not been, me standing on a mountaintop declaring the word of the Lord. That's been me saying, Jesus, I need some of that right now. And, in stumbling ways, try to offer it to others too.
Yeah, so good. Thanks, friends. And I mean, maybe like me, you found yourself, nodding along, being like, yes, yes, yes. And I think it's just been so great to get a snapshot of all of our sense of collective humility and grace, and also just tiredness. I think a lot of times when we're, as leaders, or even as church leaders and volunteers, we can risk ourselves to put on a happy face and just kind of like slog along and not pay attention to our emotions, our energy, and even our own sense of spirituality. So it's so great to hear, like, to get a inside window to all of your perspectives, journeys, and certainly I love what both of you said about the double entendre, the double weight of being involved in the landscape of U.S. politics. So something I hadn't considered. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, so maybe you do this at your dinner table as well. In our home, we have two little girls, and we at our dinner table always do good thing, bad thing. So we kind of already did the bad thing, the even better if, but now we want to pivot to like, what is the good thing? What is something in your community that's like encouraging to you, like little pockets of hope or flickers of light that you've experienced? So I won't pick on anybody out of the gate. Who wants to go first, though? I see that mask.
I suppose what's encouraged me is the renewed attention given to prayer, and that prayer is something we can do without necessarily being together. I think you see this on a wider scale on in the app stores with a vast multiplication of prayer apps.
Mindfulness practices, and absolutely.
Spiritual practices, and these sorts of things. And so I think you've seen a bit of a shift to attentiveness to these spiritual practices, of which prayer is, of course, one of them. So that's been kind of encouraging, right? So people kind of investigating maybe non-traditional forms of spirituality that don't necessarily assume in-person fellowship, and the recognition that this hasn't tied Jesus' hands, right? The lockdown. He's still very busy, can do a lot of things, and he can still be accessed. And I think that's so important that we're not only developing resilience, but we're developing reliance on Christ. And by means of these practices, we can do precisely that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very good. Yeah, other things that have sprung up in your community in terms of creative content or experience, or things that surprised you? Amy, yes.
Yeah, well, when you say creative content, we have a group of people who, St. Clair has typically not had good online presence, fairly intentionally, and we've found our way through a group of people being able to connect us and offer us new ways of doing things. Which ties in, I think what I have seen is just our missional family leaders. So missional families are midweek groups of family on mission. And they have just adapted and grown their community and their sense of mission over this time in a way that is like so encouraging to me, because it's not necessarily what I personally am experiencing. And so I think we're seeing just people lean in and step into some of their leadership gifts and kind of facing the fear that goes along with that. That's been really encouraging to me.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, I think for us, it's been interesting to see who and what has come out of the woodwork in this time. So, pre-pandemic, our church is a pretty blue-collar, down to earth, nothing fancy or showy kind of folk sort of place. So, Kevin, when you guys got your new building, you came and you said, I feel like, we have an issue with our door, and I feel like your church would be the place to find somebody who knows what to do with that. And right you are.
It was.
Because that's the kind of church that we are. And, similarly, if we wanted to do something, media-y in any, creative way at all, we would probably go to you, Chris. But all of a sudden, yeah, we've been finding people that have been, that are still having fun, which is crazy to me, with doing all the video for our services. So we've wound up on Cable 14 together with Phil Pott, rocking local access cable. We're
121.
That's right. We got doing podcasts, and there's just these creative things that have been bubbling up, and that's surprised and blessed me to recognize that there's just actually a deep well of creativity in our congregation, and that has helped stave off some of the tiredness. But like with everyone else, we're also getting tired all the same right now. But that's blessed me to see that.
I think one of the things I've been struck by is how creative and resilient people are in organic ways, like where the connections that exist continue to exist. There are people that are taking care of each other's needs. And so there's been this beautiful thing that the very, very local, which is True City congregations, we all value the local. That's kind of where we believe the life of the church is. That kind of goes on relationally. And that's then made this weird space where you can also see what other local places are doing. And so I don't know if I'm the only one that the first couple of weeks of pandemic, zapped myself into every congregation I've ever heard of across Canada just to get a sense of what life looks like for them. And then more recently to see what's really shocked me is we have this Zoom call and people from our church engage, and they all know each other and they all live near each other, and that's beautiful. But then we just started having visitors popping in, and it was people from small towns across Canada who maybe never found a church, or whose church is not able to gather online in any way right now. So they're able to jump in, and I've jumped into prayer meetings and into learning sessions with groups across the country. And I think there's this interesting dynamic where the more local we go, the more we can then listen in on other locals without losing ourselves to the internet. If all we had was online, which is I think what a lot of people right now have during COVID, is only online, you could easily lose that disconnection from the soil, from the relationships, from that placedness. But because so many of our congregations have prioritized that local for so long, we can listen into other groups, we can jump into their conversations, but bring that back here. And I'm sure some people watching this right now are not in the Hamilton area, but are jumping in to receive something from us, and then hopefully take that back to their place, their soil, and see how it grows there. So there's a really cool moment for the Canadian church wider to start doing some of that story sharing during this time in a way that maybe we couldn't in the past.
For sure, yeah. It's certainly wide. I love how you put that, widen the doors of connectivity for the church, which is what we've always been meant to be about as the church, So let's get a little bit more specific. Kevin, you helped us transition that really, really well. What are the new things? Yes. What are the new things that you've seen that have bubbled up specifically with, as you've served your people, or even like new ways of thinking with your people? So I'll go first. One of the things that we experienced at the Meeting House, we have home churches that have all shifted to being online throughout the week, and some of the most marginalized voices in the church have started to bubble up. And one young lady got in touch with me a few weeks ago and said, first of all, thank you so much for how you've shifted to online. I live with a severe disability, and attending the Meeting House has never been a possibility until COVID. So I thank God every day for this pandemic. So that was just like a light bulb for me. It's like, oh my goodness, first of all, how did we miss this? Like, how did we not consider the least of these, or people who just have not had access? And how creative is the Spirit of God bubbling up this new way of thinking and inclusion to be part of community. So that's a real highlight in terms of something new that has sprung up in this season. So what about for all of you? What's something specifically new that has sprung up in the season that you're like, whoa, that's something to take note of? Who wants to go first? Bill, I see the mask coming off again.
I suppose it's just the recognition of how much can be done online. Yeah. So during the first lockdown, I was in touch with more parishioners in the first month than I was with parishioners in the previous year, perhaps, because I never thought to just call people or arrange a Google Meet or a Zoom meeting. I thought, a real pastor meets a person over coffee. That's the only genuine way to pastor people. And I was calling people, I was arranging FaceTime with people, and hearing a lot of stories, and I really had the sense that I had my pulse on how people were doing. And so I hope I remember that post-apocalypse, that we can use media to pastor as well. And then, of course, we've had all kinds of meetings online as well, whereas before they would have always been in person. I think going forward, we'll probably say, okay, there are certain meetings that we want to have in person, but there are other meetings we can just simply do online, and people don't need to hop in their cars and drive or bike or take the bus or whatever. They can just stay home, and we can accomplish a lot there.
I think that's so good. And if I can put you on the spot for a few more minutes, I'm assuming you've probably been in ministry longer than all of us here on the stage.
What are you saying about me?
Nothing. Your words, not
or
mine.
just individually?
Yeah. And scene. It's encouraging to hear you say that. I wonder, do you feel like post-apocalypse that, your ministry perspective and how you facilitate connecting with people would shift? Or do you still kind of feel like, I'll go back to the coffee thing? Or is it somewhere in between?
To be honest, I think it has to shift.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think one of the questions we need to ask in the pandemic is, where is God leading us? From what is God liberating us? And so I think this is a calling to move into a different direction. And that different direction will mean using this technology that we've become familiar with more often. But in my own mind, I'd like to see the church move to smaller groups of in-person fellowship as well, which is what you see in the book of Acts. Of course, was very common through much of church history, and we should probably give far more attention to that mode of fellowship than we have in the past.
Yeah, so good, Bill. Thank you. Yeah. Other new things, specific new things?
I'll jump in because I think ours is quite similar to that. We have all these intentions of we should get people talking. There's wisdom here. The Spirit's at work. Our church is, when we started, it was almost all people in their 20s, but now it's very intergenerational. And so we have this collective wisdom from teenagers and kids up into people who are retired and grandparents. But it was really hard to try to do that gathering because we'd get together on Sunday and then, people would have to drive to each other's houses. You try to do breakout conversations. There's kids running everywhere. So we've actually shifted, we meet on Sunday and then on Wednesday. Our service is on Wednesday night because we got so many kids. Sunday morning doesn't work. So we do our service on Wednesday night. But we have this community hangout time on Sunday morning for half an hour where I put out 3 questions and people respond. And surprise, their responses are better than most of the things I could preach on those topics because they're so wise. They're just here. And in the same way, after the service on Wednesday night, we've been doing an hour-long service. We'll have a half an hour breakout room because in Zoom you can break out. So we've got these number of rooms with 10 people or so in them discussing questions around this. And that, again, that kind of intergenerational spiritual friendship, that organic mentoring has already started. People are saying like, oh, let me get your number. Oh, we should go for a distance walk at the waterfront. So I'm going, to the questions that I feel we have to ask in every time, much like you were saying. One of them I always try to ask is, what could we only do in this time that we couldn't do in others? What can we do with Zoom with 50, 60 people that we couldn't do in a room with 120 people, and vice versa? And so part of owning this season has been saying, what could we only do in this time? But that's also led to the question of, what should we, as you're saying, what should we carry forward? What should we integrate into the life of the church? And for me, one of the biggest reflections has been that we spend so much time as pastors, at least most of us were taught to spend so much time preparing the small groups, the content, the curriculum, preparing the talk, the sermon. But you just say, hey, let's talk a little while about Sabbath and let people share. And everyone responds to each other's questions, even those that are maybe doubting, deconstructing faith, and those that have gone through that, and those that haven't begun to ask questions maybe about how their faith integrates in their life. They're all the answer to each other's questions. The Spirit's given us everything we need right here. Why did we make it so complicated? when really this is showing us that maybe there are simpler ways forward. And that's been a huge light bulb for me over the last couple of months.
Yeah, it's interesting. You both have mentioned very specific rhythm shifts, even in terms of your perspective of leadership. It's not just I do the Sunday morning thing and the Wednesday thing. I do the coffee thing only and not the online thing. And now to see oh no, we're doing a full shift of rhythm. It's not just that. Something new is happening. So good. Amy, what about for you?
Yeah, I think so. St. Clair has always tried to stay away from programs and believing that discipleship is the heart of the church. And I think what we've seen, I apologize if this isn't the answer to your question because I don't remember the question, but I think what I'm going to say
we'll figure it out.
I think what we've seen is this invitation to a further paradigm shift of the believers are the church, and the forms of Sunday or where we have our coffee, or what our missional families look like, even what our kids program looks like, all of that we've kind of opened our hands on to say, how do we actually do discipleship? How do we do discipleship beyond the doors, in our homes, on our streets, in our neighborhoods? And those things need structures, but we have to get away from the program of it.
Yeah, very good. Anthony, what about for you? Something new that's sprung up in this season?
Yeah, I think it's similar. This lifting up of something that technically, so I'm a part of a Reformed church, technically since the Reformation we've been lifting this up as an important thing, the priesthood of all believers, but functionally we haven't actually lived it. Right? Yeah, and so now we're kind of rediscovering it all of a sudden. So, what Bill mentioned with, visiting almost everybody in the church. So we have elders in our church that we encourage to do this, and I was just blown away how they started discovering those same things. I could just, call people or video chat or just, show up and knock on their door and do a porch visit or something. It's just, it's incredible. I mean, it's been something that's been a challenge for us. Do we still do, these kind of elder visits? Is that still a thing anymore? But yeah, within a month or two, they'd done more than they've done in a long time. So it's just that's been a beautiful thing. Some of the creativity of changing, going off of what Amy said, our kind of our structures and stuff. Some churches have had long, divisive conversations about pews or chairs in the sanctuary. That conversation was just never even a thing in our church. We have pews. They're hard. They're wooden. But it had never been questioned. But all of a sudden, during this, we don't have nursery. We don't have Sunday school. We start bringing the congregation back into the space after the first lockdown, and we're like, hey. So we have families coming. Why don't we just take off the pews in that wing and just put up tables instead? Whoa, great. So now we have intergenerational worship. We have kids that stay in the service for the whole thing, worshiping with their family, seeing what their parents are doing. Their parents can kind of whisper explanations to them, and they're in there until the blessing at the end. So there's been just these really kind of creative, functional, earthy, priesthood of all believery kinds of things that have really, really been neat to see. And I think, the technology has certainly equipped some things, and we'll probably continue to rely on that for some stuff. For me personally, I think what I'm probably convicted to do is to double down on the in-person stuff after this, recognizing just how important that is. I think especially with our young adults, they've had a hard time doing the screen thing, and so yeah, I might actually be doing more coffee chats on the other side of this, but probably more of the Zoom stuff too. Yeah.
That's good. Well, we want to drill down a little further, and even more specifically in terms of attending to our own sense of spirituality. And I'll give again my family's example. So my wife Heidi is the consummate introvert. So is my oldest daughter. So being at home with our books and dogs is we're living our best lives. Whereas for my youngest daughter and myself, extrovert, it's torture. So the need to connect with people, and also how that affects my own spiritual identity, my spiritual tank being filled up or emptied out. And then I've had a number of conversations with people, and maybe you have too, watching, of just I am struggling with my faith right now. I feel like my faith is more fragile than ever. I wonder if that's part one of the question. So where have you had those conversations in your own communities, and how do you navigate them? And then part two, as leaders, are we struggling that way? How are we navigating our own sense of spiritual health and vitality while we're trying to keep all of these ministry things, plates spinning? So question one, how have you navigated or journeyed with people who have found this extremely difficult as it relates to their own walk with Jesus? So maybe Anthony, will come back to you to start.
Yeah, I've noticed, and maybe this is just entirely anecdotal, but it seemed pervasive, that a lot of folks who had a habit of, scripture reading or something like that just fell off it when the pandemic started. Doing any of those, of course, in a moment, all of our daily rhythms and our weekly rhythms just disappeared. But I found that was true for spiritual rhythms as well. And people, found themselves rhythmless, but, binging on things that they didn't really want to do and avoiding things that they actually did. And spiritual disciplines fell into that. There was a long period where we didn't really, it was just a lot of kind of sitting and sorting and saying, well, you're not the only one. But how can we live and encourage one another again to faithfulness? And I think it's just been slow in seeking to move back in those directions, recognizing that there is still a hunger for it. Bill alluded to that just a little bit ago. And so we've tried to create more spaces for prayer as a community, recognizing that it's easier to keep the rhythms if we do it together. Creating, I mentioned a podcast earlier, so our church used to have two services, a morning and an evening, two separate services. Our evening service stopped, but my fellow pastor and I, we started doing these daily devotionals, just as a way to help people continue to engage the Word, and that's perhaps connected with more folks in our congregation than other things. So there's been some good stuff that way. We've also moved, our church did monthly celebrations of the Lord's Supper, of communion. And just in January, we had decided in December, before the second lockdown, that we would go to weekly celebrations of the Lord's Supper, just to make sure that everybody got a chance to celebrate in the sanctuary together as we were rotating the congregation through. But then we went back into lockdown, and we're like, well, what are 3 things you can't do in worship on a screen? You can't smell it, you can't taste it, and you can't touch it. But the Lord's Supper in our homes gives a 3-dimensional way to experience the gospel. So again, becoming one of those spiritual discipline habits that seems really rich in this time, and even folks that were skeptical of that have started to try it out. And so I think there is a rich space and opportunity for leaning harder into some of the spiritual disciplines that have been in our tool bag all along. But it's hard to start, and it takes that communal encouragement, which is also the hardest thing to have these days to do it.
I love how you said you're helping people to do spiritual sorting. Spiritual sorting. That's so good. Yeah. Others, how are you helping people navigate the fragility, what feels like the fragility of faith, doubt right now, Kevin?
Well, I think Anthony did a great job talking about how we might help others. So I'll just throw myself under the bus for a moment that, when this started, our church was coming up on 10 years of being a congregation. I was involved in the church planting and pastoring since day one. I even had a book coming out this summer that was called "Why Would Anyone Go to Church?" and released at the only time in human history
available
that no one
on Amazon.com.
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. Wasn't trying to plug, but it's like releasing that during the only time when no one on earth can safely go to church. It was kind of like, hey God, what's up with the timing on this? This is painful. This is hard, and you're watching this community that you love, as I'm sure everyone's feeling, just get pruned and fall apart and feel scattered and disorganized. And I just found myself completely overwhelmed with the grief of it. And certainly, it wasn't like a challenge to my faith as a Christian, but certainly affected my relationship with God and my sense of, this was going somewhere. We had a plan. And it was a lot. I went through a lot this summer working some of that through. And as I talked about it this fall with somebody, I said, the whole thing presented a really excellent opportunity to kill my ego. Because as much as I love the church and love writing, and all of it was with good intentions, there's also ego in it of like, and look what I'm doing. You could, Paul's comments on the false self or the sinful man, that's still in all of that. And this created an amazing opportunity to let that fall apart and to see what's underneath that. And I think that as much as I don't want people to fall off their spiritual rhythms, I think those are good, there is an opportunity when you fall out of your spiritual rhythms, when you stop reading the Bible every day, when you forget to go to church for weeks on end, when you're struggling at home, when your workplace falls apart, when you're short on money. There's a chance to say, okay, much of that might be good, but if all of that is being destroyed, what's under that? And, as Christians, we believe that Christ is in the place of death, that Christ goes to the place of death and defeats death by entering it. And so if we can receive that, maybe it's, whether it's ideal or not, if we have fallen off our spiritual rhythms, if our faith does feel like it's shakier, to say, okay, what happens if I let that fall apart? My control over it, my hard work and devotions, my effort-based religion, which is all fine and good in its proper place. But what if that falls apart? Who is under that? And can I encounter in a very real way, alone, isolated, like on a late night walk by myself, can I encounter the risen Christ in the place of death, in the abyss? And if I fall into that space and I meet Christ there, maybe this is an opportunity for spiritual transformation. And to say, okay, whatever I'm building on, new disciplines, new rhythms, new attendance, new ways that church is going to look, it's going to be built on a more solid foundation because it all fell apart. And so that's the mystery of death and resurrection that we can experience. And so maybe an encouragement to anyone watching to not be afraid as long as you know what to look for when these things fall apart, to look for the risen Christ.
Very good. Bill?
Yeah, Jimmy, I think the church has privileged for a long time extroverted spirituality.
For sure, yeah.
And now you're seeing more attentiveness to introverted spirituality, and that's what I was talking about before with prayer and these sorts of things. And like Kevin, I'm going to confess my sins. I'm a very extroverted person, but for most of my life, I've seen this as a very positive thing, very social, very personable. And in the pandemic, I've realized that so often I've used people as a drug to get a particular fix. And that I was actually using people and depending on people for my own adrenaline and dopamine rushes and so forth. And I spent some time in the U.S. during the pandemic, confessing sin number 2.
Sin number 2.
To
right
visit
there.
my oldest son. And when I returned, I had a quarantine for 2 weeks. And I thought, fantastic, I'm just going to read. It was all alone in an apartment in our house, and I'm just going to read. And I found I couldn't, because there weren't people around. And so I just binge watched Netflix the entire time. But I've realized how much I need to practice solitude so that I get my fix from being with Christ. It's exactly what Kevin said before. My joke prior to this, which is no longer a joke, was I love solitude if I can take someone with me, right? But just to do what the introverts are very comfortable doing and very good at doing, to learn from them, to value solitude and silence and time alone. It's been a very, very hard lesson for me. My idols have been exposed. Now I've confessed my sins, and I'm looking forward to forgiveness.
You're forgiven.
That's right. Amy, what about for you?
I just want to say, I think what we have tried to do and what you guys are trying to do is just simply name and be honest about the fact that, yeah, we might be fragile. We actually are as humanity. We just don't want to admit that a lot of the time. And so, yeah, just the importance of being vulnerable and being transparent about the fact that it is hard. And it's the opportunity for grace, right? That our practices, our disciplines, however we look at those things that get us closer to Christ or make us look closer to Christ, whatever they do, they actually are not the transformative things. Jesus and the Holy Spirit are the transformative thing. They are just making space. And so, yeah, in the spirit of the creativity that we've already talked about, what are those new things that we are being invited into, both personally and corporately? And so, for me, as an introvert in a house full of kids and housemates, I equally have struggled and have had many conversations with my spiritual director about how do I do this? And it's looked like shifting from, that fulfilling, rich hour of just peace and quiet to, I have 5 minutes here. I'm gonna settle down into that place while I can, and finding the grace that piecing those things together is enough. And so, yeah, just where is the creativity as we face just the truth of our fragility? That is just true.
Before you put your mask back on, let's move to the second part, and maybe we'll wrap up our discussion with this. So what are some practices that you've found helpful in this season to attend to your own sense of spirituality, spiritual depth?
For sure. So one thing that I would use very often is an app called Lectio 365. It's a 10-minute contemplative Lectio scripture prayer. You can read it yourself, or you can just listen to it, and to help you when you know you only have a couple minutes to just drop down into that place. Very helpful. Moving your body. I think especially for us who sit and think and write and administer and chat, you have to get out of that space and just let your mind go blank. And so whatever moving your body looks like for you, I think that's super, super important. It's been so important for me. And being gracious to myself. Just when days and days go by where, my practices have not been what I hoped, or I didn't feel like there was life in them, because sometimes that's true. You end up doing something and it's well, okay. Just having grace for yourself, knowing that this is legitimately hard. You don't just feel like it's hard, it is legitimately hard.
And we can tend to overextend ourselves too, or I'll do all that stuff for all the other people, but for me, I'm just going to keep trucking along. I identify with both what you and Bill have said so much in terms of, I have always been in terms of my spiritual rhythms, the Bible is what counts. Read the Bible, get through it, make your journal notes, et cetera, and same. I just found myself coming up with I don't have a sense of anything. This just feels so hard, and it never has been. And then, Amy, what you said about space and moving out of those maybe even forced rhythms or physical space every day, that has been a light bulb for me. So I'll share it while you guys are all thinking of your own, specific examples. For me, it was exactly that. That was my light bulb moment. So it's funny it's not funny, in this pandemic, our houses become everything, right? They're your workspace, your play space, your family space, your intimate space, your spiritual space, your task space, and there's no differentiation, So it's this schmoz of just like everything that leads to, mental spiritual fog. And so what I found is that it was one day I was actually filming a video similar to this one, and in the screen I just saw like everything behind me, and I was like, there's like a butt divot on this couch where I spend all my time doing everything. Like, I don't move my body into a different space. I watch Netflix here, I read the Bible here, I help my kids do their homework here, I lead my community here, and there's no shift, like even just paying attention to space. So what I've found is I've created like a Sabbath couch. So there's one couch, well, we only have 2 couches in our house, but the second couch is like my Sabbath couch. I don't do work on it. And we actually had to shift where it was in my living room because of my own propensity to be like, wow, I'm too lazy to move. I'll just, click over to this other thing. And it's been like a really rich, like even just a shift in my own thinking of like, no more Bible, just sit in a different couch. At first it was so difficult because I'm like, this can't count. Like, Jesus, what are you saying to me? This can't count. And then taking that intentional space in solitude as an extrovert, at first, if I were being honest, which should be, I found like I had all that like entrepreneurial extroverted energy. I'm like, this is so good, this is so right for me, I love it. And then by 1 p.m. I'm depressed. Just like, I hate this, So just leaning into that rhythm and paying attention to why am I feeling this way? Not just breezing past that to what's easiest and to that dopamine release, but sitting in sometimes the solitude and pain to really digest what you're feeling. So yeah, super helpful. Kevin, what about for you?
I'll just say, because I think mine's probably quite similar. Yeah, that feeling of being in your house. For me, for some of you, it might be having kids running around as you work. For me, it's my study at the house, which has become my like space station that I like blast off things on the internet and eventually go, my space station, I feel like I'm going crazy. So I've really been trying to take the wins where I can get them. Like you said, the 5 minutes. If I'm talking to one person, they say, can we Zoom? I've said, can we do a phone call? Because if we do a phone call, I can walk, right? I can go outside and walk around while we're on a phone call. Even if it's a gray, horrible day, it's not my space station, And if I'm listening to reading a book or listening to a lecture, well, I'm going to take the 15 minutes to drive out to the Dundas Loop and listen to it on the way out and do my loop there and make a phone call there. And then, if it's Sabbath, I don't do all that. But if it's just a normal day, I might feel guilty sometimes. Well, it really only counts if I have a phone call in my room. What? Take the wins where you can get them. If you can take your kids out to go for a walk, take them out. Like, whatever you can do to give yourself some space to breathe, to give yourself some way to change up the rhythm, do it. And I've just found that to be really helpful. And the other thing I'll say is that as things reemerge, to pick carefully what we participate in. St. Luke's in the North End is a morning prayer group that run by a group that lives next door to it, including Rob, who many of you might know. And they have morning prayer on Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 a.m. And a guy from our church, Jeff, runs it at our building on Monday and Wednesday. So for a season, there was 4 mornings a week where you could do morning prayer at 6:30 a.m. if you felt very spiritual. But, I'm not particularly spiritual, but I am lazy unless I know other people are going to be there because I'm an extrovert. So for me, just saying, okay, I'm not going to go to all the things when the world was opening up in the fall. I'm just going to try to go to morning prayer 3 times a week. I'm just that. I don't need to do anything else. So to also just pick as things reopen carefully, what am I saying yes to? I can't say yes to everything because our capacity is also just so much lower for social interaction. So how do I pick a few intentional rhythms that will anchor me in a way that allows my soul to have some vitality in this time?
Very good.
What I've started doing in the pandemic, and it's been quite recent, in fact, just for the last month, full disclosure, I've been trying to walk 5 kilometers every day. Ooh. Gets me outside. I do it at different times, sometimes first thing in the morning. I've done it at 11 o'clock at night because I'm committed to doing it every day. And then before I go on my walk, it's 5 kilometers. It takes me, I don't walk very fast, about 45 minutes, 50 minutes. And I set up a little playlist on Spotify that always begins with a Devo, sometimes Lectio 365. I have probably 6 or 7 different apps I use for the Devo, and they could be from anywhere from 5 minutes to half an hour. And I've included, not intentionally, accidentally, Protestant and Catholic. And I found myself just last week, I was reciting the prayers, repeating the prayers, and I was praying, Hail Mary, Mother of God, have mercy on us sinners. And I'm like, I am the worst Reformed pastor ever. So we don't do that. We pray to Jesus. But actually the Catholic, some of the Catholic apps have been wonderful as well. So this kind of combines the need to get out, to exercise, to be outside, and also a time where I'm by myself. It's not silence, it is solitude in some sense, of a devotional time, hearing scripture read, praying different sorts of prayers, and it's been wonderful, and I really hope I can keep this up.
All right, we're going to wrap up, but I want to give us like 30 seconds final. Yeah, we're going to come to Anthony. You're going to start us off. So mindful of your own spirituality, and then what is like your 30-second commercial mini sermon, Kevin, for the people that are watching?
Yeah. Thanks, Jimmy. So, yeah, to confess my sins in terms of my own spirituality, I also fell off all my spiritual rhythms, and honestly, I haven't necessarily found a good one back, if I am to be honest, which we should be. What I'm recognizing though is, I think similar to what some others have said, that this time itself is in some way kind of subjecting us to a discipline of sorts, the discipline of just the wilderness, the monochrome, nothing endlessness of a space that's scattered and has a lot of sameness in it. The difficulty that I have, because of how I'm wired, is I tend to scatter my energy out in a gazillion different directions. I can be interested in anything, I can be doing anything, but to stop and pay attention is the hardest thing. And so the places where I feel enriched and where I think God is inviting me to spend more time is in the place in just the same old, tried and true, boring, read, pray, journal, those 3 things. But I find them really hard to do. And so the things that I've added is I re-got a spiritual director during this time, because I realized I need help to pay attention. And I've joined a 3DM huddle again, because I need help to pay attention. And that has been helping, because people are holding me accountable to paying attention. So that's been good. 30-second commercial on what? What are we? 30-second commercial, if you could say one thing to all of our True City brothers and sisters to encourage them. Yeah. What would you say? Yeah. And we'll just go around the horn. Yeah. I think what Kevin pointed to was really, really important. Whether we're talking about, Todd's talk with, going through the Exodus experience and then out in the wilderness, which is the place of death, or recognizing that, that the cross is at the center of our lives. We're a people who are prepared, if anybody is, to live in places of death and to witness and to participate in the death of things that we knew and that were familiar, and to do it in hope and in trust and in faith that new life always comes on the other side, that Easter is coming, no matter how long Saturday may last. Mm-hmm. And so I think I would just invite us all to continue to hang our hats on in trust in Jesus to see us through. So good. Bill?
My sermon might be shorter than 30 seconds. I would say rely on Jesus. You will disappoint yourself. Those around you whom you love will disappoint you. Jesus is the one who doesn't disappoint. He never leaves you, never forsakes you. He's dependable. He's always there. Rely on Jesus.
Great. Yeah. Amy?
I don't know if this is a mini sermon or preaching to myself. I had this reflection recently that Jesus promises that he is making all things new. And I so often am tempted to wait for when things are new, wait for the result, but that actually my inheritance as a daughter of the King is that we are participating in making all things new, that right now things are being made new. And so maybe to echo Anthony, like, how do we pay attention to what is being made new in this time? And yeah.
Awesome. Kevin?
Well, since you guys have all said such wise things, what I'll say to you guys is just, I'm going to break convention. Look around this room for a second. Can you show people the room? In a year, we're going to be in here, and we're going to be worshiping and praying. Okay, maybe not a year. Probably a year from now. Someday, we're going to be back, True City. We're going to be worshiping in here. We're going to be breaking bread. We're going to be laughing. We're going to be eating snacks. And it's going to be all the sweeter because of what we've gone through. So this is temporary. And we're going to love it so much more on the other side. And that just makes my heart so happy.
That's great. Well, thank you, friends. I mean, I feel like I've been shepherded so well, just listening in on your answers and identified with so much of what we've collectively said, and I'm sure that's been our collective experience as True City. So thank you so much for sharing, for investing in this time, and for being so honest and vulnerable. It is a gift to me, but also to our larger True City community. So grace and peace to all of you as you continue to navigate, the Exodus, the desert, and also that God is making all things new. So thank you for that.